It's a little after 7, I think it's 7:33, and I'll call the light plant of September 9th to order at 7:33. Just a couple of references. As usual, we'll use the raise your hand to ask questions, and we'll get those answered as we see them. And Dave, I appreciate you pointing them out if I miss them. So I just, as for starting for our meeting minutes, I know that, Alice, we don't have any draft minutes that have been distributed, correct?
That's correct. I received the July 14th meetings yesterday afternoon and have not yet finished reviewing them.
Okay, so just for the record, we have no minutes for review. And our next meeting is October 14th, followed by November 18th and December 9th. And I guess before we go on to the director's update, I just want to acknowledge that since town meeting is this coming weekend, this is the last light board meeting where Lynn and Peggy will be officially part of our board. And so I just want to recognize that during your tenure, you've both provided a lot of contributions to the board. And I looked back and there's been a lot of things going on, not only the first cost of service study, you're part of this cost of service study. You know, we've had solar installations at the landfill and W.R. Grace, and obviously the CMLP strategic plan. So you both certainly provide a lot of contribution to that. And I, for one, have learned a lot from all of you, and I appreciate both of you sending on information outside of the board in terms of keeping me educated as a new member on the light board. So thank you both for all your contributions. It's been very helpful, and we're certainly going to miss you. So.
Agreed.
And you're welcome to join us anytime in our future meetings, of course.
Definitely agree.
So, okay, so let's move on. Dave, we have the director's update next. So.
Yep. As part of the EV promotional services that CMLP provide, E&E's EV specialist teams training last month for Metro West auto dealers on electric vehicles, charging, local programs, and incentives, and tips on how to become a more recognized leader in EV sales. Staff who attended and passed a test on the materials are qualified to participate in the virtual local dealership roundtable for car buyers that we are holding at 5:30 p.m. on October 20th, with a replay at 10 a.m. on Saturday, October 24th. Concord residents interested in hearing from local dealers about EVs they sell and asking them questions can now register to attend the local dealership roundtable on concorddriveselectric.org. On the broadband side of things, we now have 1,448 customers, 1,314 are residential, 134 businesses. So that continues to, increase. We have a pretty good backlog that we're dealing with now from, when we shut down in the pandemic. So we're prioritizing that accordingly. We're working with Neshoba Brook School to add them as a new customer. They're looking for 400 megabits speeds to handle their traffic and demands, and we can provide that. So we're working through that. And the only other thing I have is Market Farm. It's direct buried subdivision. We designed, and the crews are now starting to install the conduits to replace the aging infrastructure there. And we're trying to get that project done before the end of the construction season. So moving forward, we are still in 2 groups. So we've managed that project with both groups working on it, but a lot of communication between the groups to make sure everything's done properly. And that's my update.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. So next on the agenda is the discussion on annual town meeting and review of articles and sort of votes to be taken. We talked about a few of these last month, and I know that there were public hearings following our discussion. Just to clarify, there's no motion on Article 31, which is municipal fleet electrification, and the fossil fuel infrastructure is being postponed. So the two that I think are most relevant are Article 17, which is the light plant expenditures and pilot, and also the Healthy School Buses, which was some additional funding for electric school buses for CPS. So I think we're aware of what the light plan expenditures were and the pilot amount. I'm sure we're mostly in support of that. Does the board have any further discussion on the light board proposal
I move
or the article?
I move affirmative action, I move that we recommend affirmative action on Article 17, should it be removed from the consent calendar.
Any seconds?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion?
The only thing I'd want to mention is if for some reason that came off the consent calendar, Wendy, you'd
Yep.
have to present.
Yep.
So I can get you something so you have it, but I don't foresee that happening. But if it does,
Yep. Yeah, and it's a brief presentation, if I recall, very
Okay.
brief. So that's helpful. If you want to send something along, that's great. All right. Okay, so let me take a roll call. Alice,
Yes.
Peggy,
Aye.
Lynn,
Aye.
Gordon. Gordon, are you on? Can you
Yeah.
hear me? Yes? Oh, I didn't hear you. Oh, good. All right, thanks. And I vote in support as well. So that's unanimous. All right,
And
the next
when-
article was, sorry?
Wendy, before you move on, just an FYI, we did finish the Wi-Fi for the Douglas Whitefield and tested it. So it's up and running for town meeting. That was a pretty big project. We got it done. Dan Leahy, our network engineer, did a fabulous job working with the school department. So it's up, and we will also have a Comcast van at town meeting that will provide Wi-Fi as well. So.
That's great. I mean, no, it was a last minute request, but it was a lot of work. So thank you, Dave. I'm sure it will be successful. Okay, so Article 30, the healthy school buses. I know we had some questions last month around infrastructure to support charging. Dave, can you comment again on that briefly for the audience? We don't have any concerns about charging?
No, I mean, we just have to, build the infrastructure that's needed when it's needed. But if all the buses were electric, that's a pretty big demand, and we'd have to manage that. But I think we're more than capable.
Okay.
That. I know Brian has.
Okay. Brian, do you want to share what your comments? Sorry if I'm not multitasking
Sure.
well.
Okay. Sure. I just wanted to let you know that last night, the select board and Dean, the chair, well, he's acting on his own, but he's also the chair of FinCom, had a discussion about how to fund the article. And they changed they took a straw poll to change some of the funding mechanisms. So by the time we get to town meeting, it's expected that the project will be funded in two ways, in two parts. With, I believe, debt being issued for the infrastructure and free cash being used for avoiding the educational funding. And so, yeah, and Dave, the scope of the project is 15 school buses, not all 43.
Yeah.
Understood. But I mean, ultimately, the goal is to have all of them at some point.
Yes.
Either way, it's a lot of load, and we just have to make sure we're prepared and manage that appropriately.
And I'm looking forward to working with you on that one. Big smile on my face. All right. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Brian, for that clarification. Any other questions, discussion from the board on the article? I'll entertain a motion to support the health school buses article.
I move that we vote to support affirmative action on Article 30 at the general town meeting, at the annual town meeting.
Second.
Thank you, Lynn. Any additional discussion? Nope. Okay, roll call. Alice,
Yes.
Lynn,
Yes.
Peggy,
Yes.
Gordon? Gordon, can you hear me?
He appears to be frozen.
Oh, it's frozen. Okay, so maybe there's a thumbs up coming. Well, I'll vote in support. Yep, there you go. Thanks, Gordon. All right, that's unanimous. All right, appreciate your votes for that. So affirmative action on both Articles 17 and 30. Thank you. Okay, so any other articles that people want to reference? I know there's not many being discussed. No. All right, so we'll move on to the discussion on the cost of service rate design. And Dave, I don't know if you want to start with any introduction, or Laura, on terms of feedback that you've received.
I'll turn it over to Laura. Laura, you need to unmute.
Yeah. Laura, you're on mute.
Thanks. Okay. Okay. Thank you, Wendy. Thank you, Dave. We did receive feedback from a number of individuals. I am working up a Q&A based on those questions. Some of the comments found errors in the report, and so those will be corrected. Others are just a matter of responding to the question in an informational, way. And a few may be questions about matters of policy that the board will still need to decide. I really wanted to focus your attention on just those things that need to be voted on by January 1st, because I think today in particular, we could get very bogged down in discussing many of the important but further ahead decisions about, for example, time of use, which would not be implemented for a number of years. So I did send all of you a table that showed which rates would need to be implemented on January 1st, 2021. And there are really 5 decisions to be made about the January 1st rates. And so that's what I think we should focus on today.
That sounds good. Can I just do a check? Can you hear me with this headset on?
Yes.
Good. Okay, great. Those
Yes.
other headsets it's very hard to hear. I don't know why I'm having a problem. So, so Laura, thank you very much for sending out that table. I think it was very helpful. At least helped me understand where your expectations were over time. So, do all members have access to that table? Do you want to focus? Maybe Dave, do you have that email? We could sort of share that table. Walk through them, or?
Yeah, let me.
Yeah, Dave,
Yeah.
that was sent on September 1st at 1:41 p.m.
Yep.
Okay, let me just open my email back up.
So I guess we could start with some of those. I don't know, Laura, it's easier to just go down the table directly. The first one was
Sure. So the first one really is deciding about whether or not we want to split the rates into summer and winter components. This would affect the residential R1 rate, as well as well, pretty much all the rates except the riders and the ETS. So, for example, residential R1, there would be different rates for summer versus winter. And for the electric heating resistance R7 rate, there would be new summer winter periods defined there. So the question is, do we want to split those rates into 2? The benefit is that we are more directly assigning the true cost of service to those causing it. And so there's less cross-subsidy happening. The downside is there's additional complexity now in the rate that wasn't there before. So I would leave that open for the board to decide. Let me just run down the other decisions to be made quickly. So summer, winter, the controlled water heater program would be exactly the same, but we've now calculated a higher payment. Instead of $14.87, it would be something more like $19 and change. So that's sort of a second one. Do you want to go forward with the higher payment? Third is moving the credit for solar net metering from a day ahead market rate to a real-time market rate. That one, there's really not an issue there. The differentials in the prices are minimal and change over time. Sometimes one's higher than the other and vice versa. I agree with the consultant's recommendation here. It's more attuned to what we're actually avoiding than the day ahead. So that's the third decision. The fourth is funding CARES, increasing the surcharge from 0.52%, which only funds less than 20% of the actual cost, to its actual cost, which would be a line item charge of 2.16%. I would just mention here that board members in the past have expressed a desire to move the costs related to funding the CARES program from a line item charge into the basic budget. And so presumably that would either go into the distribution volumetric charge, or that would go into the fixed customer charge rather than the line item surcharge. And then the last decision is, well, second to last, is whether or not you want to do an EV subscription rate. And I did check on this after our last board meeting, and this would only be off-peak charging. You could charge as much as you wanted. You would need a new meter. It would be a fixed rate, but it would only be for off-peak periods. And then to be discussed separately, I think, from all these rate decisions is whether or not we want to implement a voluntary time of use rate pilot in between now and when we fully install smart meters, so that we can gain information about actual charging patterns and help that inform the rates. For those of you who read the Baker-Tilly report, you may have noticed their disclaimer mentioned on nearly every page of the report, which is, you know, they base the time of use rate on the Sacramento Municipal Utility District 4% experienced opt-out rate. And, you know, they're just not comfortable with us going ahead and implementing that with 100% of our customers day one, because our actual experience may be quite different from theirs. The key with the pilot would be we would need to use existing technology to make it happen, which means the next grid meters. And there may be some challenges with actually trying to bill it. It would need to be a small pilot, like definitely fewer than 100 customers. And the other thing to note about it is that if it's a voluntary opt-in pilot, the numbers we get from the customers may not be all that informative, because those are the people who are interested in the program, and they will, for example, they'll be much more responsive to price signals than the average person who maybe doesn't care about their electric bill and isn't going to change their behavior. So a voluntary opt-in can have very different program characteristics than a full territory-wide opt-out program. Okay, so 5+1 is the way I would look at it. Summer, winter, higher water heater rate, going to real-time pricing on the solar, upping the CARES from 0.5% to 2.16, and the EV subscription rate. And then if there's time, we could talk about the voluntary time of use pilot.
All right, so to your point, the residential with the summer, winter sort of breakout and with the ETS. So remind me again, the definition of summer and winter was aligned with industry definition of summer, winter?
Yeah, the summer would really be just the period from June through September, when we're likely to, or have the potential to hit a capacity peak, and all the other months would be considered winter.
Well, you know, introducing the summer winter is what I recall is it's definitely part of industry norm, and certainly getting us closer to cost of service is is a benefit to our strategy. So that's definitely a plus. Are there other comments, questions from the board?
Yeah, I concur with the observation, Laura, that this introduces additional complexity when, heck, just a few years ago, we were trying to simplify our rates. Now we're introducing lots of new variables. So on the one hand, that is of concern to me. I thought that the technical argument, given the price differences, with winter being higher than summer in this part of the country, right? I thought that the technical argument that prices are on average 20 to 30% higher in winter is a compelling one. And yet when I looked at the proposed rate differential, I only see a difference of 3.1%. And to me, that doesn't seem worth it. If we really want to incentivize considerate behavior as a function of higher prices, then the differential should be higher, as is later proposed for time of use on peak consumption.
So the 20% that you're referencing, Lynn, is when you look at just the energy component, and this would essentially the cost of fuel in New England, because the marginal unit is still natural gas, and natural gas is much cheaper in the summer than in the winter. Right. So that 20% is just the fuel component. So for us, you know, it's currently 7.5 or 7.9 cents now that we raised the rec charge, versus our full all-in rate with all cost components considerations of like 16 cents. So it's 20% of 7 cents, but then it only turns out to be 3% of, you know, 18 cents or 17 cents. And that's how it winnows it down. And I agree with you, it dilutes it to such an extent that it's like we're really not talking about a big price differential in the end when you look at the whole rate.
I actually agree with that discussion. And I think that it further complicates for the customer to realize there's a rate change between summer and winter. And when it's such a marginal rate change, it becomes so complicated just to meet a customer interest about what's it going to cost me and is it material. So I almost think it's overly complicated to meet a desired kind of matrix for how we want to move towards the cost of service. I think that complication of the rate is more of an issue than it is for the customer. So I'm not really in favor of this one.
Wendy,
So sorry.
Brian does have his hand up when you're ready.
Okay, so yeah. Brian, do you want to comment?
Hi, Wendy. I apologize. I watched the last meeting, the recording of it, but discussions about winter and summer, I know from looking at the analysis that the capacity cost is the habit that sets that price happens in the summer, but it's billed over the year. Was there a decision that the capacity would be charged based on the billing, not on the rate, the expense setting?
Laura, can you remind us how that was? I didn't.
Yes, there was a decision. I believe it was a motion from Peggy initially that we would not, remember we talked about whether we wanted to put the $5 million of capacity costs into just 4 months or whether we were going to bill it equally over 12 months. And I had recommended, as Brian is sort of hinting at, that we put all that cost and spread it over the 4 months of potential capacity setting, because Brian's right, it's a cost causation thing. Even though we pay $5 million sort of divided by 12, right? Every month is how we pay for it. What determines whether we pay 5 million or 4 million or 10 million is our behavior during the 4 summer months.
Thanks.
Presumably, if we were to distribute that 4-month capacity charge over just 4 months, we'd see a much different winter summer price spread, rate spread.
Yes.
That would be quite substantial, I'm assuming. Great.
Yes, because you're taking that, again, that $5 million, and instead of it being 600,000 a month, it's going to be over $1 million a month.
And so the reason to do that is to theoretically send a price signal to customers. And I think the article that Lynn sent was quite interesting to read about which price signals actually have an impact on customer behavior. I'm not convinced that that is a strong enough driver for us to increase the cost in the summer months to something that is considerably higher, when most of what we're talking about is how to educate the customer on the reason to reduce the air conditioning load or electrical load during the summer during peak hours, which is a general good, a community good, as opposed to just a price signal that says, I'm going to save a couple of dollars this hour.
Yeah, I was thinking along those lines as well, Alice, and I wonder, Carol, can you tell us how successful do we think the peak warning messages are that you send out to the user group? How do we measure the effectiveness of that? And are we satisfied we're reducing demand on peak days?
Actually, Laura's been managing the peak demand program, so she's probably in a better position to comment on that.
Okay.
Laura, do you want to comment on that? Thanks.
We have been, yep, sure. We've been steadily building the group of folks to whom we send messages. You know, every time we sign someone up for a new rebate, say an electric vehicle, we ask them if we can add them to the Google group for capacity reduction purposes. And we've been successful with that. The group is now over 600 members large, and some of those are listservs. So there are definitely more than 600 individuals being reached through those communications. We've been pretty successful the last couple of years, 2018 and 2019, in actually getting the peak. We missed it in 2017, if you recall, when it was in early June. So to that extent, I think we're reaching a wider audience, and we are being more precise and more accurate with our prediction of the peak. With that being said, we don't have a very good way to measure the impact of those messages on customer behavior, in part because we don't have meters that measure individual, hourly customer use. And there's too much weather variation and whatnot within the month, which is the most granular data we have for most accounts, to try to tease out, which day was the peak and whether they actually used less on that day, since we have no idea how much they used on that day. So it's a long way to answer you, Lynn, that we really don't know.
Wendy Bryan has his hand up again.
Yep. Brian, you want to comment? Thanks, Steve.
Thanks. I just wanted to mention that I don't know what recent years are. I'm looking it up in my email, but I know in previous years, Janicetti has put out a message saying the effectiveness of the program was about 0.5% of load, which is a very small compliance rate. And that's mostly due to the fact that there's no financial incentive. It's all volunteer. And as Laura mentioned, there's it's a growing list of people. I've mentioned this before with different groups, but the CMLP needs a CRM, a customer management system, in their billing system to be able to have that message go out to more people. But so I would, to answer your question, Lynn, it is about 0.5% as I know it.
Okay. Gordon or Peggy, do you have any additional comments around the winter-summer differential? It is fairly small.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with Alice and others that it sort of would pop up, I think, as a surprise to people. And different summer, winter rates are not something that folks are accustomed to. Also, the winter feels like it kicks in when it's almost still summer. So, it just adds another layer of complication to what we're eventually going to be looking at much more complication. So not adding this before we start that seems like a better move.
Okay.
Can you
Alright.
hear me? This is
Yep.
Gordon.
Gordon, thank you. Yep.
Sure, I've been having really bad technical issues here with the bandwidth, so I'm now on my cell phone. So I've missed a good chunk of what Laura just said, but I'll agree with Peggy that a winter-summer rate seems, and others who've spoken against that. I'll agree with that. I just want to point out that I think that the benefits of the smart meter program extend to beyond just support for the time of use, and that there's improvements in reliability, data gathering, and possibly also control backwards from the plant into people's homes in order to reach out and send signals that can actually reduce usage at critical times. And those technical capabilities, in particular, the ability to control use. An example that exists today is water heating, ETS. Those are both controlled remotely. There may be other possibilities into the future. I personally am skeptical that a price signal is going to actually be all that effective at shaping the demand curve. And the reason why is that I haven't seen evidence that there's actually an elasticity of demand here in Concord. Well, maybe that'll emerge. Maybe that's a benefit of a pilot. But I think that if we really want to try and shave the peak, we're going to have to look at more than just a pricing signal to do it.
Okay. Thank you, Gordon. As I looked at the summer winter, and I was actually struck by Lynn's article that she shared as well. I sort of feel like that from a strategy perspective, the time of use rate is a more direct individual incentive than summer winter. I mean, I could be swayed either way, but I feel like that's really where our focus should be. We're going to have a lot of complexity with that to begin with. So I certainly share some of the sentiment about the summer winter not having the same incentive. The only question I had, Laura, was, we talked about summer winter for residential, but we also talked about it for the heating and the R7 rate. I just wonder if you could comment on the R7 rate, because the differential there, I think, is more substantial, right?
So since the people who are on the R7 rate tend to be winter heavy users of energy, having a higher winter price than a summer price would more negatively impact them than it would someone who was using more ratably throughout the year.
Right. But does the summer winter differential doesn't have as much direct incentive, or do you think it would have more incentive for that particular group than the R1 rate? Is there a reason to consider? I guess where I'm going is this argument about a differential and messaging. Certainly I understand it for the R1, but for the residential, for the R7 rate, it's a little more direct, and the cost of service is more direct. So I don't know if, and maybe other board members can comment on their feeling about the R7 rate, if they were commenting just for R1 or in general for both of those groups.
So if I could just say something factually, so if you took with the flip side of this and think about currently, if CMLP is experiencing higher energy prices in the winter than in the summer, and we have a flat energy rate year round, the heat pump customers are being subsidized by the rest of the ratepayers because they're using more energy in the winter than they are in the summer. And yet they're paying a flat rate. So you can either look at it that the heat pump comfort customers are currently getting a good deal, right? Or that
Yep.
they would be disadvantaged if you implemented the more cost-based rate.
Laura, can I ask a question? Do we
Yep.
have data that shows that the heat pump customers are using the heat pumps in the winter? My understanding is most people who installed heat pumps did it as an auxiliary system and mostly use it for cooling. And no one took out a fossil fuel system to replace it with or very few, with a heat pump. So I understand the assumption being that the cost would be higher in the winter, but I'm really wondering whether that's the case.
I don't know that I've done a comprehensive analysis of all the heat pump customers, but I will say when I've looked at individual bills for rebill purposes and customer questions, my own experience is that I found the heat pump customers to be bigger users in the winter than in the summer.
Okay.
And Wendy, Pamela Dredd has her hand up.
Thank you. Pamela, do you want to comment?
Yes, please.
Yep.
Pamela, Concord Green, Unit 4, Building 13. Don't we want to incentivize the use and the spreading of heat pumps? So therefore, anything that does give financial benefits to heat pump users is just fine with us. In other words, that's fine that heat pumps use more in the wintertime, and if we increase to summer, winter, in the summer when the peak is set and it makes heat pump users have a little advantage, that's good. That's a benefit, not a problem. Since we want to increase, with all things we can do, the adoption of heat pump technology.
Thank you.
I would just add that as with all subsidy programs, that sounds good at the beginning when you're trying to incentivize behavior change. But in fact, then if and when you're successful, you've created a bit of a conundrum, because then you're subsidizing a program that other users are paying for. And we've had that discussion before. And I think our decision was to move people toward cost of service in all categories. I appreciate the need or the desire to incentivize ETS or electric heat pumps rather. But I just worry that we get caught in paying for something that the cost of which gets distributed to non-users, and over time the non-user category could get smaller.
And I guess just to comment, the one difference here is I don't know, I think one of our future discussions is whether that R7 rate could move to a tour. And I don't think we know the answer to that quite yet, but that's something that's still to be decided, right? So.
Can electric heat pumps be controlled by CMLP as a peak demand measure?
Dave Wood, do you want to comment on that, or do you want me to say something?
No, I don't think we really can control them, because my thing with heat pumps is you set them at a temperature and you're supposed to leave them because of hard recovery time. So it's not something that you can shut off and then turn back on, because you might not be able to recover if it's really cold out or really hot out.
I'd agree with that, Dave. I would just add that someone else on the call in this meeting today pointed out that most of the users of heat pumps in Concord have added them as adjuncts to existing heat systems. And if that's the case, then a remote signal may be possible that would move them off of the heat pump and have them go back to the backup system. And that would actually be a really powerful load shedding ability. So I'm not saying that this is possible. I just want to point out that I'm not saying that this is currently implementable, but it's an important possibility if we were able to develop it.
It would have the impact of increasing greenhouse gas emissions. And so there's a trade-off between the electric peak and greenhouse gas emissions, where we've really
I
been
agree,
looking at
that's an issue.
electrifying everything.
Yeah, and where I'm coming from on that is the idea that, and we don't have, I'm sorry, I'll stop. I'll stop.
All right, Gordon, thank you. So let me just ask the board, I think, is your sentiment, we've had a sentiment that says the winter summer on the R1 rate, the differential doesn't seem to be large enough to warrant a change, but would you say that on the ETS, the R7 customers, that class is different and we ought to consider something different for the summer winter that's closer to the cost of service study? Certainly it would have an impact to the rate, those users, but is your sentiment the same or different from the R1 group?
For me, the same.
I agree. For me, it's the same.
Okay. Gordon, true. It's certainly, sorry,
I
Gordon.
agree, same.
Okay. Okay. All right. Well, I'm hearing sentiment around not introducing a summer winter differential at this time. Laura, in terms of feedback, and are you looking for a vote on some of these or just direction?
Dave, procedurally, what do we need here? Do we need
Right.
a vote?
I think what we would do is, right now we're getting a sense of where the board is on this.
Right.
I
Okay.
think we would have to, publish, maybe, no, we could vote on it now actually, because we had a hearing on this, right? Or was that a different rate?
No, that was a little
So-
different.
So I think we would have to technically have a rate hearing.
Okay.
But we could, the board could vote so that we know what we're putting into the hearing. If that makes sense.
So, I mean, right now, Dave, we have direction that the rate that was published as part of the study or the recommendation, the board sentiment would not be to support that. So we would need an alternative to be voting on, right?
Right.
So we need a little time to sort of work out what those would be, right?
Well, the alternative is simply going to be, a rate not split out by summer and winter. And it's going to be what arithmetically works out to collect the same amount of revenue.
Right. So directionally,
But I mean, I
agree.
can calculate.
Yeah.
We can be calculating what that is.
But we would need to present that so that it could be voted on.
Right, in a full rate hearing structure. But directionally right now, do you need a vote?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So it sounds like in terms of direction on the R1 and the R7 rates, we have some consensus around not introducing summer and winter differential rates. So could I entertain a motion from a member of the board to that effect?
I move that the board be on record as not supporting rate differences between summer and winter seasons.
Okay, thank you, Lynn. Any second?
Second.
That's from Alice. Okay, I'll take a roll call. So Peggy,
Aye.
Gordon,
Yes.
okay, Alice,
Yes.
Lynn,
Aye.
and Wendy's in support as well, so that's unanimous. Okay, so that is that first decision. The second topic that you wanted to discuss, Laura, was the controlled water heater with the higher payments in particular. Now, the higher payment really is reflecting our cost of service, correct?
Yeah, there's an assumption on the controlled water heaters about how much energy is actually saved when we control them, and the avoided payments we would make, if those water heaters were on. And back when the last rate study was done, capacity values, and it's a market value that changes with the market, were fairly low. And so the calculation of the avoided cost was $14.78 per month. And as we look forward, there are forwardly traded market values. And if the current rate study, is to cover the period 2021 to 2025, then what we have available today in known capacity markets is 2020 through 2024, through May of 2024. And if we kind of average all those future years, which range in value from $5.30 per kW a month, and then they go down year by year to $2 per kW a month. But if we average those out over the 5-year study period, well, 4 years is what we have for the market numbers, the payment would be $19.66.
Yep. Certainly higher than $14. Right. Let me just.
And we've lost.
Sorry, Laura, you were saying?
Oh, we've lost a couple, not a huge number, but a few households who've decided that the water heater credit isn't worth the difficulty. We've had some software issues with NextGrid where the units didn't perform according to the program, or there was a problem with the program. And so, during those hiccups, some people decided to not participate. And perhaps the higher payment would draw some more people back in. I think it's a good program. And as others have pointed out, it's a demonstration that we actually have the technological capability today to, have CMLP initiate a signal that results in direct load reduction. So I would support, voting in this higher payment. It's cost-based, and it's an accurate reflection of, the energy saved by turning these units off during critical peak periods.
Okay. Thank you, Laura. Feedback from the board?
I'm curious, how many customers do we have on the controlled hot water heater?
On the hot water heater, we have about 350.
More than I thought.
Yeah.
So just so that I understand, Laura, what you're saying is that you're proposing we offer a higher credit to those users?
That's correct.
What's not to love?
That's a good question, Lynn. That's sort of where I'm going. It seems to be very straightforward. I certainly am in support of this recommendation. How are others feeling? Seems like
Same.
there's support. Alice, Gordon?
I think I'm inclined to support this one.
Okay. So then I'm inclined to entertain a motion if someone would like to offer one to support this rate change.
I move that the board go on record as supporting an increase in the credit to controlled water users, moving from 14 to a higher figure estimated at 1966 currently, to reflect the savings to the light plant of that system.
Great. Any second?
I'll second that.
Thank you, Alice. All right. Any more discussion? Any hands raised, Dave? No? All right. I'll take a roll call. Lynn?
Yes.
Alice?
Yes.
Gordon?
Yes.
Peggy?
Yeah,
And I'm in support as well. So thank you. We have unanimous consensus on that. Moving along. So Laura, the third item that you wanted to discuss was the residential net metering with banking. And the change there is to use the real-time market price instead of the day ahead. And I noted that you really had no concern with this particular change. You're in support of it. Comments from other board members on this change?
Yes, just a quick question. Generally speaking, Laura, would this increase the pay, what the light plant pays for excess solar generation?
No, it will sometimes increase it and sometimes decrease it. There is no definitive pattern between the two markets. In fact, if there were, then it could be arbitraged, perpetually by market players until they evened out. So it's just a different forum for the prices, but they are neither higher nor lower in either forum.
Mhm.
Okay.
But the idea is that this would more closely match our actual costs.
That's correct.
Are both prices readily tracked by users online or in other ways? They're both posted.
Yes.
How complicated
correct.
is this for a rate?
It's simple. Carol has to not hand calculate. There's one per month arithmetic average that needs to be taken based on prices posted by the New England ISO. And rather than looking at day ahead prices, we'll merely need to take the average of the real-time prices, which are provided exactly below the day ahead. So there shouldn't be any change in procedural pattern or extra work or anything like that. Carol, do you concur?
I do. Yeah, it's no additional work for me. And then in the billing system, it's the same amount of effort. It's just, a different amount calculated basically the same way that we have been.
Okay.
And that would be updated monthly.
All right. Thank you.
I missed the benefit of this. Is there a reason to make this change? I thought you said the cost really kind of even, it looks about the same.
I'm sorry, Peggy.
No, go ahead, Laura.
The consultant, their description of the benefit here is that, they said our understanding is that CMLP attempts to clear 100% of its known energy imbalance in the day ahead market. But the only volumes subject to real-time prices are the variances between forecasted supply and demand and the actual supply and demand, which includes distributed generation. Since the real-time market is used to fill the gaps caused by distributed generation, and the energy generated by the customer is not necessarily predictable or schedulable, it may be appropriate to utilize the real-time average pricing for ISO New England to calculate the credit. This would match the market and pricing for CMLP's avoided cost. So again, the argument is in favor of using the price that most closely resembles CMLP's avoided cost.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I would certainly be in favor of the shift.
Can you tell me on what page that you just read from so I can go back and take a look?
That's page 37.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I certainly think it makes a lot of sense to be more real-time or to close that gap and be consistent in all our methodologies using real-time. So.
Oh, I already highlighted that.
Okay.
Wendy,
All right.
Pamela has her hand up.
Okay. Thank you, Dave. Pamela?
Thank you. I have a quick question. I don't know if now is the right time to ask it, but when we have our opt-out of the time of use rates, when we have it, I want to encourage us to make sure that that is a financial penalty to opt out and not a financial benefit.
Okay.
It is very important that people have the right to opt out, but they must pay the cost to do so. And there is a cost to the whole system for people opting out of this. And
Yeah.
okay, so does it? Okay, thank you.
So I think, Pamela, I think that's one of the decisions that we have yet to make in a future rating decision for opt-out. We're certainly not ready yet to offer that in the marketplace, but I think consensus has been that there ought to be a higher cost to the opt-out. So just for the record, that's what the board has discussed in the past.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so back to our discussion about the net metering with the real-time costs. So I'm hearing that there's consensus and support of this rate change. So I would entertain a motion.
I move that the board go on record as supporting the shift in the net metering credit from use of the day-ahead price to the real-time price, as proposed by
Lynn.
consultants.
Second.
That was Peggy. Thank you. All right. Any additional discussion? No. Okay. We'll take a vote. I'm certainly in support of that. This motion. Lynn?
Yes.
Peggy?
Yes.
Alice?
Yes.
Gordon?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So consensus that we will adopt the real-time market price for the residential net metering. Thank you. The fourth topic, and I'm just doing a time check. I think we're at 8:30. We're going to go to about 8:45 on this topic. So we'll continue on. The next topic was the CARES program. And Laura, as you mentioned, this has been a topic of discussion for the board as to whether the CARES program should be funded directly as part of a budget line item or include as a charge. And so I don't think the board ever came to any consensus on that, but it was certainly something that we wanted to discuss at a future date. So this seems to be the time to start that conversation. So Laura, any other comment on the CARES program?
Yeah, I might just point out that two things are of importance here. The first is that because in the past, the rate charged was such a small percentage of the actual cost incurred, the method for CMLP paying the remainder that was not charged through the line item was to pay for it out of net income. If we increase the line item charge from 0.52% to 2.16%, which reflects the actual cost of the program, it will have the effect of increasing rates, because now we're saying we want to collect the full cost of the CARES program in the line item charge, and we still want to earn the same net income that we had chosen before. We're not going to reduce our net income by the difference any longer. So that's a upward pressure on rates. And the second thing is, if you do consider moving collection of this cost from a line item charge to general rates, if it gets put in general rates, it's probably going to be put in as a fixed cost related item. So it's probably going to end up, you know, either in the distribution or the capacity and transmission payment, or in the customer charge. If it gets more fixed in nature, you know, it may be that lower usage customers pay a higher percentage, because right now, if it's a percent of the total bill, the higher your bill, the more you're contributing to the program. Mm-hmm. If you put it in the general budget, and I don't know exactly how it would work out accounting wise, and whether we would, you know, how much of it would be fixed and how much of it would be variable. Now that I'm talking myself out of this, because we've already put as much of the fixed cost as we're willing in the meter charge, and the rest of the fixed cost is already in C&T. So it's still going to be variable. All right, so strike my second point. I'm sorry to take you around in a circle. But yeah, it shouldn't cost shift between customers. The only thing it's going to do if we increase this is have an upward pressure on rates.
Yep. Okay.
So I'd like to make a comment in general about our strategic plan. I shared this comment with Dave and Laura earlier. When I went back and read the vision statement from the plan, I found myself agreeing with earlier community comments that it wasn't saying a whole lot. It's a nice set of platitudes about basically being in partnership with our community to deliver good service. And while we certainly all affirm those goals, to me, our vision statement now, as we've been moving forward in the last year or two, is really about encouraging the goals set out in the Energy Futures Task Force. Yep. And everything we're talking about doing with rates now and over the next several years is about incentivizing better behavior, right? It's about greening our power supply, encouraging beneficial electrification, and reducing overall consumption. So to me, the CARES budget line item is an integral part of what we're trying to accomplish through our rate setting. And as such, I would see it most logically being an overhead charge of the light plant. It is part of the services that we deliver to our customers. I hear what you're saying, Laura, that we've already sort of decided how much we want to raise that meter charge by, and that's another topic I hope we'll talk about, the meter charge and the demand charge difference between which I don't understand. But it seems to me that embedding the cost of CARES in the overall service delivery of the plant makes the most sense given where we are today.
That was really well said, Lynn. I think that we should also recognize that currently 80% of our CARES budget is a general line, is not the general line, is a general line item and not a customer line item. So we're already funding 80% of that program from our general funds or net income. So the 20% that we have on the bill for customer charge seems insignificant almost to where we want to be.
Right. True. Peggy or Gordon, do you have any additional comments on the CARES program and its funding?
Mute.
No?
Gordon is talking, but he's muted.
Oh, was he? I can't see him.
I'm sorry. Yeah, if you don't mind, Laura, could you explain again if there would be a negative consequence to raising the surcharge that's currently at what, 1.4% or something on customers' total bill? If we just made that 2%, you said that something bad would happen?
Right.
No, I started to think about cost shifting, but as I was talking to myself, apparently I talked myself out of that I don't think that will happen. So the only thing that I think really happens, Gordon, is that even if we put this in the general budget, if we're not going to pay for it out of net income and we're still going to demand the same net income target, it's going to have an upward effect on rates. And consider, since we've been adding costs based on the percent of renewable in the portfolio or percent of non-emitting, this will be an additional item that would put upward pressure on rates. I just want to, be very open and clear about that.
Or potentially upward pressure on the per account cost, right? The per head, the meter fee. Is that right?
Well, I think what we're saying here, the reason I talk myself out of cost shifting is because we'd be moving from a line item percentage, which is a percent of the total bill. So higher customers who pay more on their electric bill pay more towards the CARES. And even if we put it in the general budget, because we've already maxed out what we're willing to allot to the fixed meter charge, all of the increase would be reflected.
Uh-oh, frozen.
I was going to say,
right mid-sentence.
No.
I'm going to take advantage of that pause. Curve that the R1 schedule that we see on page 24 proposes shifting the meter charge from $12 to $20.42 by 2025, which to me is a pretty small increase. So I personally would have no problem. I consider CARES an overhead cost of doing business, and I think it should go into the meter charge.
So for the record, the average increase, the meter charge increase is a 5% annual increase. I don't know what this CARES charge would add to that, but that was the plan from the 5% annual increase. But Laura, I don't know if actually Laura's speaking. Laura commented that we had maxed out what we were allocating to the fixed meter charge. I wanted to just understand that.
But remember, every time we put something into the meter charge, it reduces rates.
Correct.
It's a closed system.
It's fixed.
Yeah, and I agree, Lynn, that on the whole, it's revenue neutral. But what it does do is it shifts costs from the higher users to the lower users. And honestly, I can see a lot of benefits to doing that. Okay, it removes seasonality from, or not seasonality, but weather trends from our budget. So like some years when you've got a really extreme temperatures, electric sales increase. How do you budget for that if a lot of the overhead is actually layered on top of volume? That's an advantage. If we got rid of the tiers and distributed overhead evenly over each household, then that brings down the incremental cost of electricity, and then you wouldn't need a R7 rate. That's also a benefit. So I understand there are definitely benefits to moving towards a higher fixed fee. I just feel hesitance about increasing the cost for our lower users. And that's it. It's a conflict in my mind, and that's the problem that I have.
Mm-hmm. No, point well taken, Gordon.
The other comment is that the CARES budget hasn't always been consistent year to year. So by making it a line item, we do have the flexibility to increase it. And I guess we could still retain some of that funding in the annual budget if we needed to for extraordinary plans, because we wouldn't want to have some unpredictability into that fixed rate for the CARES portion. But it certainly could still be a fixed portion for now.
I mean, I think just, and then specifically about the CARES, I have an observation that we haven't actually been budgeting CARES. We've been spending it and then making sure the money is there in kind of a post hoc fashion. So maybe, so maybe we could move this more into the budget, make it a line item, make it something that we budget every year, and we'd actually have a little bit more visibility into it and a little bit more.
The only thing I'd say to that, Gordon, is we do budget the CARES budget every year annually.
We do.
In the, I think it's section 7 of the budget book. So to be clear, we do that.
Well, we don't have explicit control over the revenue piece, right? Or we do. I mean, it's fixed as that line item, and if there's kind of a disconnect there. In fact, we've been spending more than the line item produces.
Correct.
Way more.
Right.
80% on top of that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So what I think that I would argue that this should be part of the cost of operating the light plant because it meets the customer interest, the town goals. And I would agree with how eloquently been put that. As far as the 20% as a percent of the users, that customers' use of energy, as we shift to all electric buildings, all customers will be using more electricity. So that argument would be in favor of having a line item over a billing charge per customer use based on electrical use. And I think the only way we're going to meet the town goals for greenhouse gas emissions is through increasing our incentive-based programs that will incentivize the direction that we want to go.
So Alice, just to restate the obvious, you're advocating for not putting it in the line item, but keeping it in the administrative budget line item, or the majority of it there?
Right. Right now it's 80% as a budget item, 20% as a line item. I'd rather see it fully funded as a cost of business of the light plant, that this is the direction that the light plant should be moving.
Right.
And if that puts upward pressure on rates, so be it. Is that what you're saying, Alice?
I don't understand how that would produce.
Because right now we're taking a big chunk out of earned income.
And so how would that change what we're doing? For the 20% of the budget that we're not doing that with, it's coming out of rate. So that's just a rate shift from one place to another. We're not increasing the overall.
But as long as we want to keep earned income X%, then that's why it puts upward pressure on rates. Because right now, earned income is actually smaller than what we want.
But we just approved a higher rate of return on rate base from 2% to 2.5%. Wouldn't that cover? Wouldn't that allow us the extra funds if we needed for retained earnings to be used in this case?
But
Well, I'm
only-
confused. I thought we didn't want to use retained earnings. I thought we wanted it fully covered in the budget.
I guess
Right.
retained earnings are not part of the budget. It's the part of the budget that we didn't spend.
Yeah.
And so we'd have lower retained earnings, which is for under the rates that we approved. I think it would be increasing what we currently have as retained earnings, which we have quite a large line item now for retained earnings, or yeah, retained earnings.
Could I say something?
Yes, please.
Okay, so we're getting too many subjects mixed up together. So the retained earnings is really meant as a mechanism to pay for the additional cost of replacing the infrastructure than depreciation allows. So for example, depreciation, was set back when it cost X to install the system. Well, today it doesn't cost X to install the system, it costs a lot more. And the amount we're taking off of depreciation each year doesn't cover that inflationary pressure on prices. So retained earnings is meant to address that, and it's meant to address debt service payments, which are not currently, in at least for the purpose of setting rates, are not in the income statement. Okay, they're outside the income statement. They're in the balance sheet. So the retained earnings is for those two purposes. The net income, is what we're talking about here, and let's just use a round number. Let's say CMLP was targeting $1 million of net income, but in the past we never actually got that because each year we had to spend $600,000 fully funding the CARES program. Now, if we move it into a fully based cost of service in the operating statement, then we would have $1 million still targeted for net income, but that 600,000 would end up being recovered through an increase in the rates.
I see that.
I guess I sort of see that.
Okay, I think we've had a lot of discussion on this. Gordon, I don't know if I heard a comment either way from you on your preference for the CARES program. Do you want to see it as a line item or budget? To Alice's point, about 80% is currently funded in the budget.
Yeah, I do like the fact that right now there's a volumetric, effectively, it's a bill-based assessment, so that people that have larger bills kick in more than people who have small, and I hate to give that up. I like the progressivity that's in our current rate structure. And every time we move one of these items into the per capita, the per meter charge, I understand the reasons for that, but we're giving up that progressivity, and I just, that's what I'm concerned about. I will say that I like the idea of budgeting for it. I think that moving it onto a line item has some advantages. I'm just not sure that in the context of this discussion, whether or not we can do that without increasing the cost for lower users. And if that's the case, then I'd rather just keep it the way it is.
Gordon, I think there are two separate decisions on the board's part. One decision would be to fully fund the program as a cost of doing business in the general budget. The second question is how to pay for that and whether you would increase the meter or customer charge or whether it would be collected volumetrically through the capacity and transmission rate.
Okay, well, I'm in favor of the first one then.
So that's the general budget funding and not doing it necessarily. Okay. Okay, and then I think Lynn and Alice, I heard sentiment for supporting the funding through the general budget. Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
Okay, and Peggy, would you agree with that?
Yeah.
Okay. So I think, Lori, from that perspective then, that would, I think, imply that we would not increase the charge from the current 0.5% up to 2%. But I don't know if we're saying remove the CARES charge in its entirety. But is that what the board is supporting, is removing the CARES line item in the volumetrics component of it?
That would be my preference.
Okay.
that we recognize that this is the cost of our business to provide incentives to help us reach town goals. And how we pay for that is magic.
As Laura points
I
out.
mean, we will pay for it, whether it's a line item, whether it's a CARES type line item or not. We are spending that money. So we need to raise those funds to spend that money.
So if we want to retain the progressivity that Gordon spoke of,
Right.
that would imply that we, instead of charging 0.52% on our bill, we now charge 2.16% on our bill.
Right.
We're fully funding it, we're fully acknowledging it, and it's retained as a separate charge on the bill. Is that right, Gordon?
Yeah.
Except that you could still retain the progressivity by still moving it from a line item entirely to being funded as a general item in the budget. And then in terms of rate making and how it would get paid for, you know, unless you agree to increase the meter charge, it's going to get paid for volumetrically in the capacity and transmission charge, just as some other fixed charges currently are proposed to be paid.
Right.
I'd be happy with that. In other words, I would welcome some volumetric basis for this.
Even
it doesn't
though
have to be completely volumetric, but at least having some volumetric piece, I think would be beneficial to the town as a whole. Maybe not to some people, but I think that it's something that the majority of the town, I think, is likely to embrace.
even though with our direction towards electrifying everything, those people who choose at this point to electrify would pay a higher rate for the CARES fund, which would basically be incentivizing exactly what they just did.
Yeah, contributing to a
Circulate.
community fund to extend that.
Right.
Yes.
But isn't it better or smarter to use that community fund raised from all customers, not from those specifically higher rates for those who have already made the investments on solar or EVs or electrifying, you know, their heat pump strategies, having them pay both? I would look at it as a cost that's spread among the entire community because it's a community value, not to pay disproportionately by those who use more electricity because they've already made those decisions to electrify. I understand why Gordon would say why his interest is in the progressivity, but as we shift towards a higher electrical use across the town, it changes that value to me about how progressive that the cost structure is.
And you know what? Maybe in 5 years, we revisit it.
Hmm.
We're not there right now. I'm also looking at my bill right now and I see a CARES surcharge of 36 cents
Yes.
in my total bill of $71.25. So I think we've probably spent enough time about
Talking about it.
what is a really small charge. Laura, remind me again, the basis on which CARES is assessed is what? It's my subtotal?
Yeah, I believe it's the total before the underground surcharge is assessed, and certainly before the CARES surcharge is assessed.
So it's already a volumetric charge.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's based on the dollar amount of the bill, so it's still progressive. The more you use, the more you pay. It's just that it's a percent of the dollars instead of a cents per kWh.
And Wendy, we do have Pamela Drew with her hand up.
Yep, I know that. Okay, and then I'm seeing some other comments as well. So Pamela, can I just have you comment quickly? I know that we're sort of running behind, so I want to try to wrap this discussion up.
Just to keep in mind that eventually we won't be buying any outside energy. It'll all be produced by our solar panels on our roof and distributed by the light plant. Now, all the charges will have to be fixed. That's an extreme, but that's the goal, right? So we have to have some method of getting there.
Yep.
That's it.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I'm still hearing some sentiment about supporting this in the general budget. To Lynn's point about a very small line item amount on the budget, I'm not sure it's getting a lot of customer visibility there. So I certainly would agree with funding this through the general budget. And I think I heard Gordon and Alice saying the same. And that it's really, there's a secondary decision about how that actually gets funded that can be discussed at separately than this decision. But Lynn, do you have any additional comments?
I guess I would just say that if we want to fund it out of the general budget, then it should be embedded in our rate. And we should explain to customers through our vision statement that our cost of service includes the cost of encouraging beneficial electrification, savings on consumption, et cetera.
I'd agree. Okay. So would someone care to offer a recommendation on our CARES program at this time so we can give Laura some direction on how to proceed with this?
Let's see if I can try that.
Okay.
I move that the CARES budget be fully funded from as a budget line item as opposed to a line charge on the customer bill. Does that say it simply?
But any comments from members? Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Okay, thank you, Lynn. All right. Assuming no more discussion, we've had plenty. So let me just take a roll call. Gordon?
Yes.
Okay, Peggy?
Yes.
Lynn?
Yes.
Alice?
Yes.
And Wendy's yes as well. Okay. All right. Thank you all for that discussion. Consensus on that. So there were two items that we did not get to under this agenda item. So the discussion around the EV subscription rate, as well as the voluntary pilot for the tour rate. I'm assuming, Laura, that we can defer those to next month's meeting. And if that's okay, I'd like to move on to the RFP review because I know that information's been shared with the board as well. But okay.
Yeah, the only thing I would just say is if it's going to be a different board, perhaps you want to give the outgoing board members, some say at least in the EV subscription rate.
Yeah.
Okay,
And Wendy, if I could,
Yep.
we have 30 minutes in for the RFP.
Yep.
I don't know that we're going to use the full 30 minutes for that because you guys just got the RFP to review. So I don't know if you've had a chance to go all the way through it. So.
Okay, thank you.
I would prefer to get these other items kind of where the board is, and then we'll have a shorter discussion on the RFP.
Okay, all right. Well, I appreciate that comment because I wasn't quite sure. So then let's proceed back with these discussion items. So going back to the EV subscription rate, if I recall, Laura, this was a new optional rate that could be provided to customers for off-peak charging only. If I recall, there wasn't a lot of precedent for this in the marketplace, so it's fairly new, but it clearly is still something that's being recommended. Do you want to add more to that, Laura?
Yeah, just to say that a number of board members quite correctly pointed out that this seems to be an aberration from our goal of cost causation, rate setting.
Yep.
And energy efficiency, where you're not trying to encourage people to use more of something or let them use as much as they want for a fixed fee. On the other hand, and that's all correct, but on the other hand, one of our goals is to try to electrify transportation, and we're trying every which way we can to do that. You heard Dave mention at the beginning of the director's update about some programs that are underway to help people, purchase electric vehicles, find out more about them, become less intimidated. We're trying everything we can to try to promote electric vehicles. And one idea was, well, perhaps if people don't understand, how many kilowatt hours a Tesla uses, they have no idea what they would pay. They don't know how much they pay for gasoline. If we offered this fixed rate that said, look, if you switch from your gasoline powered car to your electric car, we're telling you that if you charge off peak, no matter how much you charge, you're going to pay this fixed amount, that might encourage some people, not everyone. You guys are all pretty familiar with how much cents per kWh it is, and is that a good deal or not? But not everybody's like that. And so this was just a way to try to reach some other people that we haven't yet reached, and perhaps sway them to drive electric. And that's it. It's not that complicated.
Okay. Yeah. So I think there's value in predictability for a customer. So I see that perspective on that. So can I have any comments from the board? I think, Laura, you spoke to the issue being a little counter to our tour type rate, but do board members have other feedback?
May I speak?
Yes, Gordon.
Sure. This sounds like an innovative program. I think that it'd be great to offer this. I think that other communities will be interested to see what our experience is. I'd like to just caution that if it doesn't work out, we may want to reserve the ability to cancel the program. So, offering this on a I don't know, trial basis where people can say, we'll know that they'll have access to this thing for 5 years, say, for, with the expected lifetime of their first car, something like that, but that we're not committed to providing this forever. The reason being that, like, for instance, we go back and forth at different times about whether or not, I don't know, say well, just today we talked about the heat pump program, whether or not that is actually working out the way that we expected it to, or, whether EV is exactly right for us and the customers. Just keep reserving, letting the customers know when they sign up for this, that this is a trial. We got to see how it works out for everybody. Does that sound, does that make sense to you, Laura?
Yes, it does. I think we could set it up as a pilot. And, one thing we might consider, Gordon, which you just mentioned, which I really like the idea of, and certainly other utilities do this, is rather than have rates open and close on dates specific, perhaps we could, especially in the case of purchasing a car, which you need to pay for over a number of years. And perhaps if we'd done this with ETS, we'd have less difficulty now. And it is in promising the rate for a certain number of years per customer. So if you sign up on January 1st, customer A gets it for 5 years starting January 1st. Customer B signs up in June, they get it for 5 years, and that sort of thing. And so, I think that makes a lot of sense and gives more predictability to the customer. I don't know, it might be difficult for us to administrate it because I don't know if we've ever done rates that way. Have we, Dave or Carol, if you know?
That sounds very complicated to me.
Well, how else do we get over the hump where, Gordon's saying, okay, guys, here's our new electric vehicle subscription rate. It's $40 a month.
Yeah,
So I'm going to buy a new car based on that. And then we switch it in 6 months.
Although realistically, the cost of fueling an electric car is way down on the decision tree about whether to buy an electric vehicle. There are far greater concerns about the driving one. Whether you have range anxiety, have the ability to drive all electric versus a hybrid. So there are bigger decisions than the $40 a month on however you're going to charge your vehicle. And that 40 changes based on it. Does a person pay $40 a month if they have a hybrid Prius and also pay $40 a month if they have a Tesla, which takes much more energy to charge a Tesla than it does a 12-mile electric range on a Prius.
I personally am really not wild about it. I think the amount of energy you consume in your electric vehicle differs substantially depending on whether you're a commuter or not, depending on whether the kind of, well, I don't know in terms of per kilowatt hour. I was about to say range versus not. Obviously, during a pandemic time, people are consuming a lot less. We certainly are in this household. in terms of what it costs to charge our car because we're not driving that much. So the idea of charging a flat monthly fee for the car, to me, doesn't make sense given all of the other direction we're proposing in our energy conservation and cost sensitivity models. It really, to me, is a question of information. Put out a flyer that says if you traditionally commute 30 miles each way to work, your likely charge cost is going to be X, and if you piddle around town, generally your charge will be Y. I think with better information, consumers or customers can make that decision.
Laura,
and I agree with Alice that there are other, whether to invest in a charging station at home versus not. There are other larger considerations versus the minor cost of actually fueling your car.
Laura, did you, from your customers or people who are considering it, is this an option that made them more comfortable with the predictability of charging? I didn't know customers themselves. I appreciate that this is a new way of incenting customers or getting customers on board, but do you get feedback from customers about the concern over the cost, the predictability of the charging cost?
That question would be better answered by our EV specialist, Mark Scribner, who's the one who interfaces with our customers about EVs regularly. I don't tend to talk to them directly all that much.
Yep. All right. Peggy, do you have any feedback on this topic?
I don't.
Okay. All right. Well, I sort of am on the fence. I think, to the degree we have an optional program. I like Gordon's idea of trying to set some kind of predictability and setting a rate for a period of time. Could we set a rate on a commitment to have an optional program, the issue, instead of having it customer specific, say that we could fix a rate for 2 years at a time, so that we as a plant know that, for 21 and 22, it's a certain rate? Would that be an option that would make it simpler to administer and some predictability?
I think that would be a lot simpler and also be, provide the predictability.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm willing to give this a try as long as we let customers know that this is a pilot.
Yep.
And with that may end, and that may be a problem. It may mean that, but on the other hand, maybe they'd say, well, hey, look, I'll try it too. I don't think the risks of buying an electric car, as Lynn said, the risks of the cost of the electricity is low on the list. It tends not to be that. It's certainly a lot less than fuel. So if the program ends and the people are back having to do it the way they would have otherwise done it, I don't think that would be a huge setback for anybody. And I just want to make sure that we actually have our arms around the actual costs of how you actually build this program and do it right, so that it's fair to everybody, fair to the plant, fair to the users.
Yep. Okay. So I'm hearing some support for a program that has some predictability and sets expectations with customers around a period of time, so that at least we're being upfront and transparent about what could change in the future. So I certainly am in support of at least providing the option to customers. And it could be that customers won't buy into it and it won't go anywhere, but I think it's worth trying, given where we're at right now, and we don't have the meters in place. So can I entertain a recommendation for Laura on how to proceed with the EV prescription rate?
Laura, do you have a sense of where you would set that? You don't yet, right?
Yes, actually we do. It is about $40 a month. I have to look up the exact
I think that's what it was.
number in the report.
Honestly, from my perspective, that's expensive.
Yeah, it's, again, you know, I feel like it's difficult for you guys perhaps to appreciate the benefit of this because you are so knowledgeable and you're much more comfortable understanding what per kilowatt hour is. And those of you already driving electric kind of know what your pattern is. And I agree with Alice that, you know, this is a program that would be much more beneficial to a full battery electric user driving some distances, like, you know, in a Tesla versus for a hybrid car that's only going around town. But again, it's really it's not for you guys. It's for people who are fairly unknowledgeable about electricity in general. And all they know is, I know what I pay for gasoline, but I have no idea what I'm going to pay for electricity.
But you can tell them under alternative scenarios.
Right. That just, you know, again, this is, we are, I mean, we do educate about that and we have one-on-one coaching and we, you know, we do that. It's just that, you know, are we reaching everyone who could benefit from this? I think it's a good idea to try, but I understand, you know, those who say it's, you know, it's an artichoke and a goldfish. I mean, we're trying to put two things together that are very different. Yeah, so, I mean, I get that.
And this is for home systems, right? And it would require a meter.
It would require a meter, yes.
Why would it require a meter?
Because we would only allow off-peak charging.
So if the car is scheduled, if you can program the car for off-peak charging.
And you're not going to do it at a community charging station. You would do it at home.
Correct.
And Wendy, Brian has his hand raised.
Hey, Brian, do you want to comment?
Yes, he does.
Yes, he does.
Of course I do.
Of course.
I think Lynn's comment about reducing complexity in the rate structure and the fact that $40 to a knowledgeable EV driver sounds high are all correct. But I also believe that Laura's point about the uneducated EV driver knowing that there's a rate that's $40 does sound less than what they pay in gas and is desirable. But I think my feeling is the overriding thing here is we want to move towards time of use. We want people to have a time of use structure based on load. And this new EV rate would be another technology specific rate, which I'm very against because we have too many, and it makes the pitch for anything to do when we talk about the billing system a more complex discussion, and it gets people to focus more on the numbers in the rate structure than the technology and the benefit. So I'm always leaning towards a simpler time of use rate. And though this is a great idea, I don't think it's in the interest of the long-term plan. So that's my comment. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. All right, well, I'm hearing sort of mixed perspectives from the board. Gordon, I know you are in support of this initially. Are you interested in offering a motion to support this?
Sure. That the board moves to recommend the proposed EV charging rate program as defined in the cost study, I think it was, with the provision that it be introduced as a pilot. Does that sound like a good motion?
It's just to be specific, though. It's the EV subscription rate that you're supporting.
Okay, thank you.
As recommended.
So the board moves to endorse the EV subscription rate pilot.
As a pilot. Okay.
Duration of which is to be determined by staff?
Yes.
Okay. Is there a second to that?
I'll second.
Okay, thank you, Peggy. Okay, so I'll take a roll call. Lynn?
I guess so, yes.
Okay, thank you, Lynn. Alice?
I still have some hesitancy. I hear Laura saying that it's not difficult to implement, but if it's a pilot, I want to make sure that we have the means to study the outcome of the pilot so that we know what the benefit or the not benefits were of the program. So we're not just trying it to see how many people buy EVs. We have to understand why we're doing this. And if we have some sort of follow-up, some sort of outcome, then I could support this as a pilot.
Okay. Thank you. And Laura, does that seem reasonable as an expectation to support the?
Yeah, I might
implementation?
need more specific wording from Alice in order to make sure we adhere to whatever the board finally adopts.
So what if we amend the motion to move to institute an EV subscription rate as a pilot with appropriate follow-up on uptake in electric vehicle purchase? No, that's not quite, that language isn't quite good enough.
Or EV adoption?
So the idea of doing this is to figure out whether having a subscription rate is an opportunity that people take to buy a new vehicle, whether this is a determinant factor that people consider. So I guess we want to know that the people who signed up for it, this made a big difference for them in purchasing a car, or were they going to buy it anyway and this was a little sugar. So I don't know how to actually say that. So to institute an EV subscription rate and provide a review of purchasing decision making based on this rate to determine the effectiveness of this as a pilot.
I'm guessing the best way to answer the question you're asking, Alice, would be to do some kind of survey.
It's just some way of following up with customers to understand how this benefited their decision making.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which we don't need to define right here.
Right.
But
Yeah.
Because that's what a pilot does. It studies something.
Exactly.
So we have to have the means to study something to figure out, is this a valuable program?
You know, I would just say, Alice, I'm thinking in my mind, and maybe this isn't true, but it seems to me it might be, that one benefit of something like this, if we can get the message out widely enough, is that people may actually buy more cars because they knew this, but never actually even sign up for the subscription rate. So for example, they might say, oh, well, I'm not going to ever pay more than $40. How much am I going to save in ongoing fuel and maintenance costs? This might just help them figure it out by knowing that it's not going to be more than $40, because CMLP offers a program that you can just max it out, at $40. And so it could be that this has a beneficial impact on car buying that we are never able to determine.
But I think the idea is that staff should be reaching out to new buyers of EVs to better understand what motivated their purchase.
And yeah, we do.
And would this rate be available for those who already have an EV, or is it only for new buyers? So
no, I think everybody.
Yep.
I just think we have to understand what the benefit is, that we're trying it as a pilot. What are we piloting?
So
you're going to want to measure costs and benefits to the light plant, right? If everyone switches to 40, and if they're really, I'm making these numbers up, but if they're really consuming $60 worth of energy, then that's not a great from the light plant's perspective.
Right.
So we need to understand that.
Yep.
So that seems about measuring the cost of service after we've implemented the rate. But in terms of Alice's comments, so we had a motion to adopt the EV subscription rates, charging rates as a pilot with appropriate follow-up on, is it customer decision-making as it relates to the rate? Or what specifically are
Well,
we looking
and
for?
I think we don't have to sort that out necessarily at the moment, but the board will revisit this in a while and decide whether or not, based on the evidence, the data that the staff gets about of how effective it is and how much it costs, we can decide whether to continue it.
Correct.
Okay, I'm just trying to be clear on our motion because Alice had a concern that we make sure that there's appropriate follow-up. So if we're comfortable with the language that Alice offered as with appropriate follow-up, I'm okay with that as long as the rest of the board is from a voting perspective.
Appropriate follow-up to determine the effectiveness of a pilot program. Then we can decide how you do that.
Okay.
So I would second that amendment.
Okay, thank you, Lynn. All right. So roll call again. I lost track of where we were. Lynn?
I support the motion as amended.
Okay, Alice?
I support that.
Okay, Peggy?
Yeah.
Okay, Gordon?
Yes.
Okay, and I'm in support as well. Okay. Yay, one down. So Dave, I'm going to do a time check where we can continue. It means that we're going to have to defer the RFP discussion.
So just real quickly on that, we did send the draft RFP, the draft out to the board. We were hoping to get out a little earlier, but there was a lot of work to be done.
Yep.
Carol and Laura did a great job getting it together. I think it wouldn't be fair to you guys to get into a full discussion on that because you just got it, a day ago. So
Okay.
I would think we should defer and have that as an agenda item on the next meeting.
Yep.
And it'll give you guys a little more time to kind of digest what's in the RFP for consulting services for AMI.
Okay. All right. Appreciate that. Thank you. So let me just go back. The last item that Laura was looking for feedback on was a residential tour rate, and specifically to do an existing tour rate for a pilot, for a volunteer pilot group. So Laura, do you want to comment further on that recommendation for a pilot? You did.
My recommendation would be that we defer this for another time, because this rate can be crafted pretty much, in the future. It doesn't have to start January 1st, 2021. And so I would suggest, maybe particularly based on comments I saw from the last meeting, that you just accept the liaison and public comments to stay on time track.
Okay. All right.
Could I just say, whether it was in the Baker-Tilly report or in the DOE report that I sent around, when I read that Southern California introduced time of use first as an opt-in for a pilot period, I got excited when I saw that. I thought that was a great idea. I realized it requires deeper discussion, but I wanted to go on record as saying that I thought that was an intriguing option.
Okay.
Why do you like that, Lynn?
It tests the waters. I realize that you get the more committed customers, but I think it's worth learning from those committed customers over the period of a year or year and a half. Lessons to be learned that could then help you when you roll it out as the default requirement at a later date.
I see. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn.
I agree with that, Lynn, and I'd offer too that a phased rollout could help us work out the kinks. I mean, we are still, we have a new billing system that's, I think, been a tremendous success, but as a ratepayer, I have sometimes encountered some issues that I need to call in about, and then they sort things out. So I think sometimes slower is better, or anyway, phased can be better.
All right, thank you, Gordon. Okay, so let me just move on to the last agenda item so we can wrap up. So moving on to liaison and public comments. Dave, I'm looking at you for, I don't know why I can never see people's raised hands on my application.
Currently, we have no raised hands.
Currently no raised hands, okay. I don't have any liaison reports. I know the audit committee has not met
Yep.
since February or March.
David Allen has,
David's here. All right, David, I didn't expect to see you today, but do you have a comment?
I'm partly here. As Wendy knows, we are decamping to Maine because the grandchildren in the household are going to school, and we're ancient bodies, and hopefully we'll protect ourselves. We'll see. Wendy will also know that I quite belatedly over the weekend sent a note on the fixed variable ratios. And first of all, apologies that it took me so long to get it together. It's not my inclination.
I did want to let you know, I did forward that on, and I'm just seeing in my email that I have a draft sent back to you. I apologize, but the board did get your email.
All right, good. Did Dave and Laura get?
Yes.
Okay, good. Then let's not go into it. Let's take it up next time. If we can get it on the agenda so we can talk about it then.
Okay, and this is specifically related to fixed rates. So I know we'll have more discussion on that as well. And I'm not seeing additional comments. There was a chat discussion around how many customers benefit from the CARES program. And I don't know if we know that off the top of our head. Every year there's different components to the program.
so I answered that in the chat that
Did you answer it?
contributes to the surcharge, and number of customers that participate in CARES varies based on the programs.
Yeah, okay.
I would argue that all customers benefit from the CARES
Agree.
because of the
Yeah.
common good.
Right, as a program. Okay. All right, well, I see 9:25. Any other comments from the board?
See y'all at town meeting with umbrellas.
Yeah, exactly. And let's
Right.
hope it doesn't rain, but let's see.
I would just like to finish up by saying what a pleasure it has been serving on this board. Staff are fantastic. Thank you, Dave, Laura, and Carol, and others that aren't on this morning, but it's just been a really wonderful experience. It's a lot of complex work, a lot of complicated issues and concepts, and it's really fun, and it's a real asset to the town.
True.
Thank you.
What she said.
Thank you both for the service. It's been wonderful.
The combined knowledge of the two of you will be incredibly missed going forward.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
That's what I was about to say. I mean, we are not going to be able to replace either one of you. Are unique, very knowledgeable. You know, your industry experience and your economics truly have been very beneficial, and your big picture perspective.
The good news is that we have their emails.
Yes, exactly. All right.
Thank you so much.
My only question is Gordon's still going to be outnumbered.
Oh, yeah. Well, we'll find out next month, won't we? All right. All right.
All right, thank you.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Can we
Thank
get a
you
motion?
all.
to adjourn?
Yeah,
Move
we need a
to
motion to
adjourn.
end the meeting.
Move to adjourn.
Thank you, Peggy. Oh, Lynn and Peggy. Thank you. All right.
Aye.
See you Sunday.
Hi, everybody.
Bye.